Chapter 3, Where Prices Come From, the Interaction of Supply and Demand. So the demand, we're going to cover the demand side of the market, the supply side of the market. We're going to briefly go over market equilibrium and the effects of demand and supply. So what determines the price of a smartwatch? Demand for smartwatches. How many smartwatches do consumers want to buy? Affected by the price of the smartwatches and affected by other prices including other goods. So supply of the smartwatches. How many smartwatches will producers be willing to sell? This is affected by the price of the smartwatch and affected by other factors such as other goods and prices of other goods. So let's talk about how this works. Our model of a market. To analyze the market for smartwatches, we need a model how buyers and sellers behave. The model we use in this chapter is a perfectly competitive market, a market with many buyers and sellers, all firms selling identical products, and no barriers to enter for new firms to enter the market. While these assumptions are quite restrictive, the model is still useful for analyzing markets. So let's talk about it. I'm not sure how many of you have a smartwatch. I have a smartwatch. So we begin our analysis of where prices come from by investigating how buyers behave. We refer to this as market demand. This is how buyers behave. The demand by all of the consumers of a given good or service. So this is the demand by all of the consumers for any good or service. So this example is a demand schedule. So if the smartwatch was $450, there would be 3 million smartwatches per week demanded. So on the vertical axis, we have price. On the horizontal axis, we have quantity demanded. So as you can see, if the price was 400, there would be 4 million per week, and then 350, there would be 5 million per week, and then 300, 6 million per week, and so on. So the demand curve, although this is a straight line, is actually downward sloping. A demand curve shows the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of the product demanded. This is quantity of product demanded. This is price. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. When we draw this demand curve, we assume ceteris paribus. This means, in Latin, all else is equal. The requirement that analyzing a relationship between two variables, in this case price and quantity demanded, such as all other variables must be held constant. We understand that the world is ever changing and there's so many factors in the economy, but in order for this chapter or for these models to work, we're assuming that all else remains the same. So quantity demanded is the amount of good or service that a consumer is willing and able to purchase at a given time. The law of demand, a rule that states holding everything else constant, when price of the product falls from 450 to 400 to 350 to 300, the quantity demanded increases. Price falling, quantity demanding increasing. And when the price of the product rises, when you go up from here, quantity demanded will decrease. Quantity demanded goes back this way. What else explains the law of demand? When the price of a good falls, two effects take place. Consumers substitute toward the newly less expensive good. And consumers have more purchasing power, which is like an increase in income. We call these the substitution effect and the income effect. So the change in the quantity demanded for a good that results from a change in price, making the good more or less expensive relative to other goods that are considered substitutes. We do this all the time. Let's, for example, talk about food, right? If we considered hot dogs and pizza to be equal, if the price of hot dogs went up, we might just buy more pizza because we consider them substitutes. And the income effect is the change in quantity demanded of a good that results from the effect of a change in the good's price on consumers' purchasing power. Maybe because pizza and hot dogs are equal, we'll just buy the pizza if it's less expensive because then we still have money left over, therefore changing our purchasing power. A change in something other than price. So a change in price, you'll only go up and down the same demand curve. A change in price does not cause a shift in demand. So a change in something other than price affects the demand, causes the entire curve to shift. So this would be an increase in demand shifting right, and a decrease in demand would shift left. We're going to do a practice worksheet after this chapter. As the demand curve shifts, the quantity demanded will change, even if the price doesn't change. So as you can see here, this is quantity demanded 1. As this shifts, at the same price, a decrease in demand, quantity demanded goes down. And as this shift, an increase in demand, at the same price, quantity demanded goes up. So some factors that influence market demand. Income. An increase in income increases demand if the product is normal, and decreases demand if the product is inferior. Whenever I think about inferior products, we're not talking about like, we're talking about how people feel or react to that product, not specifically that the product is technically inferior. But for example, when I was in college, and you don't have a lot of income, right? I ate more ramen noodles. Now, ramen noodles, for me, is an inferior good. As I earn more income, I eat less ramen noodles. So that's an inferior good. Whereas, let's just say filet mignon for me, as I get more income, I'll increase my demand for that because I can afford more steak, right? But this can apply to anything. I'm just using food examples. So prices of related goods. An increase in the price of a related good increases demand if the product are substitutes and decreases demand if the product are complements. So another example, Red Bull and coffee. Let's assume that I just want caffeine and I consider Red Bull and coffee substitutes. If the price of coffee goes up, I'll demand more Red Bull because coffee costs more, and I consider them substitutes. An example of complements are chips and salsa. If the price of salsa goes up, I'm going to decrease my demand for chips because I really only eat the chips with salsa. The other things that affect market demand are tastes, population demographics, expected future prices. We will discuss how each of these affect demand. On normal goods, which is a good that demand increases as income rises and decreases as income falls. Clothing, restaurant, meals, vacations. Inferior goods are items for which demand increases as income falls. Ramen noodles. Oh, they used my example here. And secondhand clothing, right? So, an increase in income, holding all else equal, ceteris paribus, would increase the demand for clothing. However, the same increase in income would likely decrease the demand for secondhand clothing. So this is because this is an inferior good. This is a normal good. Substitutes. So goods and services can be used for the same purpose. A Big Mac or a Whopper or Ford F-150 or a Dodge Ram, jeans and khakis, right? Complements are things used together. The Big Mac and the McDonald's fries, hot dog buns and hot dogs. Left shoes and right shoes. I'm not sure how you can buy one shoe, but we'll go with it. So an increase in the price of the Big Mac would increase demand for Whoppers. Think about it. My competitor, the Big Mac, the price went up. So that means demand for Whoppers is going to increase. However, the same increase in the Big Mac would decrease demand for McDonald's fries. Now, McDonald's fries and the Big Mac are complements, so that's causing a decrease in demand. Now, this doesn't change. All a price does on the Big Mac, for the Big Mac curve, it would be up and down D1. So, smartwatches are like the new Apple Watch, are not perfect substitutes for smartphones. They do not fulfill identical purposes. I know the new Apple Watch has, you can make phone calls and has GPS, but it hasn't really replaced phones. It's just a complement, in my opinion. So most people already own a phone. Will they see enough benefit from a smartwatch to purchase it? I think the fitness part of it and certain other features have caused the smartwatch to be popular, but I'm not sure if it's as popular as they anticipated, right? This is always, you're trying to predict consumer behavior, right? So other things, taste, if the consumer's taste change, they may buy more or less of a product. If consumers become more concerned about eating healthy, they might decrease their demand for fast food. So this taste has nothing to do with price. It really has to do with the fact that, well, we're now being conscious about calories, so I'm going to decrease demand, which is a shift left for fast food. Demographics, the characteristics with respect to age, race, and gender, increase in the number of people buying something and decrease and will increase the amount demanded. An example, as elderly population increases, demand for medical care is going to increase. So as the population changes and more people become retire and are older, they're going to be a demand shift. So from D1 to D2, an increase in demand in healthcare. Consumers decide which products to buy and when to buy them. So how you think about everything that you do. So the demand side of the curves is pretty obvious to people because they're shoppers. When the price goes down, they demand more, right? This is a common thought that kind of happens in the background of what you're doing. So future products are substitute for current products. An expected increase in the price tomorrow increases demand today. So if I think hot dogs are going to go, I know there's a sale. I think hot dogs are going to be more expensive tomorrow. It's going to increase demand today. However, an expected decrease in the price today, in the price tomorrow, decreases demand. If you found out the price of gasoline would go up tomorrow, you would just fill up your tank today if you could, right? Apple strongly discourages its employees from speculating about what new model will appear. Why? Suppose a customer learns that a new iPad will be available next month. The new model will potentially substitute for the current model. The price of the current model will likely fall next month. Both effects decrease current demand for bad for Apple, right? And I think kind of we already know this is going to happen. For the most part, Apple releases in September, right? So right now, if you're thinking, I might need a new phone or a new iPad, you're like, maybe I'll wait till after September. Either I'll get the new model at the same price or similar pricing as the current model, or I'll get the current model at a discount, right? So that decreases demand for Apple products right now. A change in price of the product being examined causes movement along the demand curve. I can't say this enough. A change in price in the same market for the same product only causes movement from point A to point B. It does not cause a shift right or left in the curve. A change in price is just a change in quantity demanded of that product. So if the price goes from $450 to $400, we move along the curve and we demand, instead of 3 million smartwatches per week, we demand 4 million smartwatches per week. Another change effect demands, the demand is changed. So if the demand is changed, a shift, we go from point A to point C. And that's actually a change in demand, not movement along the same curve. There are some similarities and some important differences between the supply and the demand and supply market. In this section, we examine market supply, the decisions of generally firms about how much of a product to provide at various prices. So when you think about the answer to a supply question, I want you to think like a business owner, right? In demand, you're thinking like the consumer. In supply, you're thinking like a business owner. So a supply schedule is a table right here that shows the relationship between the price of the product and the quantity of the product supplied. A curve shows the relationship between the price of the product and the quantity of the product supplied. So this is going to go in the exact opposite way, or positively sloping. At $250, they're willing to supply 3 million per week. As the price goes up, the suppliers are willing to supply more. Why? They'll make more money. Or there's more cost to producing. A lot of times you can produce let's just say you can produce 5 million per week, but you'll need an extra machine. So after that, so therefore you might have to charge more for that, or you need more labor, of course. So the quantity supplied is the amount of good or service that a firm is willing and able to supply at a given price. The law of supply, you definitely need to know that. The rule that holding everything else constant, increases in price cause an increase in the quantity supplied, and a decrease in price causes a decrease. So this is positively sloping. Remember, demand was negatively sloping. So a change in something other than price that affects supply causes a shift to the entire curve. So an increase in supply is a shift right, or a decrease in supply is a shift left. As the supply curve shifts, the quantity supplied will change, even if price doesn't. So let's start here. This is our supply, and this is our quantity. So if we change and we have a decrease, it would be the same price but less supplied. There's all kinds of things that could cause this. Or if we have an increase in supply, like a new person or a new company enters the market, that could cause that. So what are factors that influence the supply market? Price of inputs. These are things that we use to make the good. Technology change. Price of substitutions in production. Number of firms in the market and expected future prices. Inputs are the goods used are the things used in the production of the good or service. For a smartwatch, input includes a computer processor, plastic, and labor. So, an increase in the price of the input decreases profitability. So, increase in minimum wage will decrease the supply because that's causing an increase in the price of the input. So, we can't supply the same number at that same price. A decrease in the price of an input increases profitability and therefore is an increase in supply. So gas prices until recently, continue to go down, right? So that would, if that's an input for us, that would increase quantity supplied. A firm may experience a positive or negative change to its ability to produce at a given level of output with a given quantity of inputs. We call this a technology change. New, more productive variety of wheat would increase the supply of wheat. So technology change. Government restrictions on land use for agriculture might decrease the supply. So this is an increase in supply. This is a decrease in supply. Many firms can produce and sell alternative products. An Illinois farmer can plant corn or soybeans. If the price of soybeans rises, he will plant less corn. So if the price of soybean, I can produce corn or soybeans. If the price of soybeans rises, that means I can sell it for more. Therefore, I'm going to plant less corn, decrease supply, and an increased supply. Cattle provide both beef and leather. An increase in the price of beef encourages more cattle farming. And hence an increase in supply in leather. So we have the increase in the price of beef market. So if this was beef here, but there's a quantity increase in leather because by producing more beef, we would use more cows, therefore more leather. More firms in the market will result in a more product available at a given price, greater supply. So fewer firms equals supply decreases. So more firms in the market. Let's say a new supplier of cell phones enters the market. It's a harder market to enter, but let's just say they do. What that will do is more people supplying cell phones at the same price. So that can increase supply, and then what happens is people might change their prices based on that. If a firm anticipates the price of its product will be higher in the future, it might decrease supply today. So I think about shovels in the winter, right? If they think a big storm's coming, they might decrease the supply now and increase it when the storm comes so they can charge more. Now there are rules on price gouging, but that's just an example so you can help you understand. The Arnold Schwarzenegger film Collateral Damage was originally scheduled to be released on October 5th, 2001. The film contained plot elements about terrorist attacks. The production company Warner Brothers decided the movie would have higher demand if it did not show immediately after 9/11. So it was delayed until February 2002. Current supply of the film was decreased because of a relative expected future price increase. A change in the price of the product being examined causes movement along the supply curve. So if the price changed from 400 to 450, we would go from point A to point B on the same curve. So quantity supplied increased, but we didn't have a shift in supply. Any other change other than price in this market would cause an entire curve to shift. Technology change, decrease in the cost of inputs, a decrease in the future expected prices would cause supply to shift right currently. So let's cover market equilibrium. Market equilibrium, so the majority of your test was on the last two parts of this chapter, but you just need to understand what market equilibrium is. We will not be shifting the curves for market equilibrium. We will for supply and demand. So market equilibrium is a situation in which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Recall that the markets with many buyers and sellers are perfectly competitive. A market equilibrium in one of these markets is called competitive market equilibrium. There are 25 firms selling smartwatches. We will assume this is enough to generate competitive behavior in the market for smartwatches. At a price of $350, consumers want to buy 5 million and producers want to sell 5 million. So that is market equilibrium. We say market equilibrium is $350 and 5 million per week. Since the buyers and sellers want to trade the same quantity at that price, we do not expect the price to change. What if the price was $400 instead? At a price of $400, consumers want to buy 4 million and suppliers are willing to produce 6 million. This gives a surplus of 2 million watches. The situation in which a surplus is a situation in which quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. Prediction: sellers will compete amongst themselves, driving down the price to the market equilibrium of $350. What if it was $250? At $250, consumers want to buy 7 million and suppliers want to produce 3 million. This produces a shortage. Sellers will realize they can increase the price and sell as many smartphones. I thought we were on smartwatches, and so the price will rise. I think they mean smartwatches. So they'll basically increase the price until they get to market equilibrium. Price is determined by the interaction of buyers and sellers. Neither group can dictate price in a competitive market. However, changes in supply and demand will affect the price and quantity traded. Predictions about price and quantity in model require us to know supply and demand curves. Typically, we know price and quantity, but we don't know the curves that generate them. The power of the demand and supply model is the ability to predict directional changes in price and quantity being traded. So this graph shows smartwatches before Apple enters the market. When Apple enters the market, technically there's a shift in supply, and therefore the price was dropped. The market equilibrium price goes down because there's more people supplying. We cannot say how much without knowing enough information. For now, we can only predict that the price will fall when Apple enters the market. Now suppose incomes increase. What will happen to the market equilibrium? So incomes change demand. So if incomes increase, they will demand more, therefore increasing market equilibrium. This is just a graph. So if demand curve is unchanged and supply curve is unchanged, then price and quantity remain unchanged. If demand curve shifts right, increases, then quantity increases and price increases. If demand curve shifts left, quantity decreases and price decreases. If the supply curve shifts right, quantity increases but price decreases. And if the supply curve shifts left, inward, quantity decreases but price increases. From 2006 to 2013, the price of Blu-ray players fell about $800 to about $95, while the number of Blu-ray players traded increased dramatically. What best explains this? What do you guys think? What best explains this is many firms starting to manufacture Blu-ray players, and therefore the input costs fell, And so supply went from S1 to S2. Alright, so I'm going to skip through this. And that is the end of the chapter.